why is it important to cultivate self-compassion? Why is it something that explicitly or intentionally you might want to cultivate in yourselves? So first of all, I'd just like to introduce you to the definition. So what is self-compassion? Self-compassion is really defined as the kind of kindness, the kind of intention that you might give to your best friend or somebody that you really cared about, but to yourself. And most of us find that there's a real imbalance in that. Most of us are a lot nicer to other people than we are to ourselves. So if you just think for a moment about how you treat yourself when you're irritated or upset or stressed, I bet rather like me, you might, castigate yourself. You might say mean things to yourself in order to, you silly thing, or worse. And that,
worse,
especially perhaps when you're driving. Anyway, so that self, with all this wonderful mindfulness research and psychological research that we can now have at our fingertips nowadays, there's a whole wealth. Someone was talking to me in the break. It said, Imelda, there you are. So there's an explosion of people talking about, self-kindness, self-compassion, and the reason I think for that is that it's been found to have such a profound effect upon all sorts of different areas of our well-being and our functioning. So including our physical health. So you might not immediately think that, but I work in a persistent pain service, so I work with people all the time, working with them as a mindfulness teacher and as a psychological therapist, helping them to work with suffering, basically, being in a state of chronic pain. And so these practices, they're really not, they're not ooey-gooey, they're really evidence-based, as Robert has been telling us. So if we could have the next slide, please. Thank you. So, mindfulness and the mindfulness that we've been talking about up until now has been kindness to the self, and self-care is implicit in these practices of mindfulness. So although you're not explicitly being taught self-compassion, you do, with the practices, it's an act of self-care to give yourself some time out, to de-stress, to move from the stress response to the relaxation response. All of that is really, as I said, an act of self-care. And so these kind of practices would come under the heading of attention practices and awareness practices. You become more aware of your mental patterns or your triggers to stress or your triggers to depression, depending on what you're working with. And of course, I'm coming from a health perspective, so I'm talking about all the sort of anxiety, the stress, depression, pain. But the other benefits, the more sort of, if you like, the wider benefits of mindfulness are equanimity, calm, able to enjoy your life more, or a sense of well-being. So I hope you don't feel alienated by, if you like, you're talking about all the negative aspects. I guess that's just, as I said, the culture I'm coming from. So self-compassion comes under the third, if you like, the third area, which is cultivation. You're cultivating a practice. You're cultivating a different capacity, a different internal resource. And in order to do that, it's very, very helpful, or it's usually beneficial to have an established mindfulness practice first of all, because this cultivation of self-compassion can be quite challenging, and I'll go into that a little bit more.
So Caroline, can I just clarify if you don't mind? So what you're saying is that a lot of the mindfulness courses, like the mindfulness-based stress reduction, the compassion within that course is more like kind of implicit, it's kind of in the background.
Absolutely.
And it's more about cultivating awareness, managing your attention, triggers, and so on. And what you're saying with self-compassion practice, it's more explicit. You actually building, cultivating, bringing on those kind of emotions of loving kindness, softness, understanding towards yourself.
Absolutely.
I just wanted to check they understood it.
Thank you, Robert. So I'm on this picture. So we'll be coming back to this because I thought quite nice for us to do a very brief practice, loving kindness practice. And so one of the ways in which we will do that is to bring up to bring up something like this that really gives you a feeling of something that makes you feel really good. I would have said, bring up a partner or a friend, but sometimes it's a lot easier with animals.
I wonder why.
So mindful self-compassion was developed by the woman on the left is Kristen Neff. She's a researcher into self-compassion, and she's developed, along with Christopher Germer, basically a mindful self-compassion course, and it's all been, as you probably imagine, completely evidence-based and researched. And it's an 8-week course that's run, and it's basically the research coming from it can let you know some of the details, but it has really far-reaching effects on even things like, I suppose, the things that have caught my attention coming from my background is it helps reducing trauma symptoms. People who suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder or other severe stress disorders, it helps them to manage those symptoms really effectively. It can help with physical health and managing a long-term health condition. So of course, coming from a persistent pain service, that's really helpful to know that is really helpful to people managing persistent pain, living well, having well-being, obviously whilst at the same time being in pain. So, it's really, really important. Next slide. So, Kirsten Neff has come up with 3 main components for self-compassion. The first is really having mindfulness or being aware, understanding and aware of it. So you're being with what is present. You're not exaggerating it, you're not catastrophizing it, and you're not pushing it away, having aversion to it, because as the old saying goes, what you resist persists. So if you try and press and push things away, they have a habit of boomeranging back. So mindfulness helps us to be with maybe difficult emotions or unpleasant feelings, sensations, and just allow them to be present. The sense of common humanity, we all suffer, and reminding ourselves that we're not the only person to have felt like this, and that it's part of the human condition is to suffer at times. And thirdly, the self-kindness versus not self-punishment. So as I said at the beginning of this short presentation, that we're very quick to being punishing ourselves, talking to ourselves in a harsh way, and how that's not helpful, and how learning to respond to ourselves in this way as if we were our own best friend is something that needs practice and needs cultivation. And if we go to the next slide. So self-compassion, massive, huge, as I was saying, evidence base for it. So in England, in Britain, we've got Paul Gilbert, and he's developed a professor who's developed compassion-focused therapy. He's based at Derby University. He is internationally respected. There's that Christopher Gurma and Kristen Neff, that we just had their pictures just up there. There are other researchers like Eve Ekman, who's developed a course in cultivating emotional balance. And I might need your help pronouncing this, Robert. Is it Dr. Thupten Jinpa?
Thupten Jinpa, yes. This is the translator of the Dalai Lama. He was one of the translators of the Dalai Lama.
So from all sorts of different backgrounds, basically there are various courses and trainings in developing self-compassion as a really helpful resource, internal resource to have. So if we just go to the end, back to this picture, the lovely best friends picture. So what I'd like you to do is, either looking at that picture or thinking maybe of your own best friend, whether that's animal or human, just thinking of that. And I'm just going to guide you through a very brief self-compassion practice. I think I will do it standing up, just so that I know that my voice is a bit too low. So, closing